We had to
You know,
Boog and Boog. Yeah, just rename them. All right, so we
sounds like a
are
goofy sitcom, by the way. Boog and Boog.
Boog and Boog. We could do a goofy sitcom. I'm not that funny though, so I guess we probably couldn't.
I think it could be
But
unintentionally
whatever.
pretty hilarious, whether intentionally too, probably.
On
And
it.
so, if everyone is just hearing
Yeah,
us
maybe.
now, hey, we're live. We're not dead. I mean, that is different from quite a lot of the rest of the world, but hey, we do what we can. I am Joel Valenzuela. This is my co-host Chris Maidment, who is no longer in the solitary confinement cell kind of situation he was before. Now it looks like there's actually some nature behind him, which is a good idea. So, how's it going, Chris?
Yeah, I'm on
How
my
are
home.
you? Are you
I'm
well?
I'm on my. I guess you'll have to define that a little bit more.
Are you
But
well?
I'm on my homestead out in Peterborough today. I got kicked out of the AFP office. They closed their doors, so I'm relegated to my wilderness homestead where there
Yes.
are no looters or rioters or protesters of any kind except the bear who comes every once in a while and tries to eat my chickens. So
Yes, and that's not a metaphor. It is just the bear. The bears. The bears coming in, trying to eat your stuff. So, my life is also very peaceful. I mean, I don't want to switch around the camera to show but we got, yeah, life's great. I mean, other than everything kind of burning around us, life's great. So, by around us, let me clarify that. New Hampshire seems to be doing great. Obviously, there's been the COVID panic and stuff, and the stuff we've been ranting about forever has impacted the economy. Lots of businesses closed down. No, it's not perfect, but we're personally safe. Everyone in the state is pretty safe right now. But the rest can't be said. That can't be said for basically the rest of the whole damn world. I mean, there's so in case you have been kind of living under a rock for the moment, there was a unfortunate gentleman who was unfortunately hauled out of a car and unfortunately killed by a police officer putting his knee on his neck until he could not breathe and he died. And that's kind of, unfortunately, that's not a rare occurrence in this country. It's one of those big black marks, no pun intended, on kind of the American concept of freedom and stuff. The two big ones are the IRS and how crazy they are and how they try to tax you even if you're making income living in a different country. That's a giant one. Let's add three, right? The second, the warfare state. A lot of other bad countries are still kind of keeping to themselves with that. And finally, there's a lot of like police killings that don't happen in most semi-free countries. So, as a result of this, there's of course been, justice for Trayvon, justice for whoever. They're just a long string of names that are too long to repeat. That there's been a lot of protests and sometimes even riots and violence and looting over the years. And basically nothing has changed. Basically, police still get to kill with impunity, which is not something that happens here in the bright state of New Hampshire, really. But it's not like it can't happen. It just doesn't. But it happens in the whole rest of the country, especially with minority communities, particularly with the black community. And this time, the uprising has been crazy. Pretty much every major city and a lot of minor cities in the U.S. have had just throngs and throngs of people out there protesting, enough is enough, all that kind of stuff. And it was big enough and unresty enough that basically other groups have started to sort of participate in that. So basically, it's not just been protests, it's not just been communication, it's not just been some riots, it's not just been a few police stations burning down either, although that has happened as well. It's been everything being burned down, everything being looted, everything being destroyed, lots of people dying. It's crazy out there. So, all right, what's your hot take on that?
Oh, I mean, let's start at the beginning, right? At least this incident. I mean, the video of the cop kneeling on George Floyd's neck for 4 minutes is horrible. And there's three other cops. Two are kneeling on other parts of George Floyd's body. And then there's another cop standing by watching the whole thing. Meanwhile, George Floyd is saying, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And there's other people around saying, hey, he can't breathe, get off of him, right? So I don't know how any rational person watches that and thinks it's justified police action. Um, anybody making excuses for those cops is just as bad as the cop, in my opinion. And for, so the protests are justified because things like this happen all the time, white, black, Asian, Mexican, whatever. The police can use excessive force or unjustified force and they get away with it. And you mentioned some of the other cases. We don't need to go down, into detail on everything, but we have to look at the reasons why police get away with these types of incidents and form better public policy so that they don't happen anymore. And it's my understanding that the quote unquote militarization of the police started around the time Nixon launched the war on drugs.
Of course.
And there were a couple other interceding incidents, and I think there was like the violent protests against Vietnam. There's the LA riots. There's been a whole bunch of incidents, and every time one of those incidents happened, the police, instead of getting less militarized, get more militarized so that they can do these riots, right?
Yeah.
And just to be very, very clear, there is a huge difference between a protest and a riot. Huge difference, right? So I live in Peterborough, which is, my state rep likes to call it the liberal utopia of the Monadnock region or something like that. I heard her say. Some kind of nonsense like that. And on Saturday around noon, I went to the feed store to get chicken food. And there were like 100 or so people with, Black Lives Matter flags and Black Lives Matter t-shirts and, various posters like I can't breathe and justice for all and stuff like that. And a peaceful protest is wonderful. I love peaceful protests, whether it's for Reopen New Hampshire, whether it's for Black Lives Matter, whether it's for, I don't know, PETA, whatever that one is, ethical treatment of animals, and all that nonsense. Like a peaceful protest, great. Do it all day long. Don't care. You can help raise awareness for your cause. You can help, whatever, move the needle. And I think there's a lot of support for protest, especially in this case, because I think everybody, I haven't seen a lot of people that said George Floyd. I haven't seen anybody actually say, George Floyd deserved what he got. And I don't think he did. I think it's murder. I think all four of those officers should be tried for various crimes. Obviously, the one kneeling on his neck should be tried for murder. He was arrested for murder the other day.
Yeah,
but
again,
the other
after
three
they burned
are
down
accomplices.
a bunch of
But they
police
didn't do
stations.
anything.
Yeah, and like
right, they didn't arrest him until after they burned down the police stations in Minneapolis.
Yes, and to be perfectly fair, which I think it's a heinous thing to do, is to stand by and do nothing. It's also to be expected because for very many years there's been this thin blue line culture, and I'm sorry if people like thin blue line. They like to, if you have a thin blue line shirt or decal or whatever, I understand you have reasons for that, but the culture of that there's a separation between police and regular people, that there's some kind of immunity, that there's some kind of we have to back our brothers and sisters in blue. Well, no, you have to back everyone. You have to back, the human race. And if someone has had a bad day and just decides to go above and beyond and just smash someone's head in the pavement when they didn't need to, when the guy was kind of resistant but not really, and they go a little bit, it's a nice guy, he's like a good dude, but he's been under a lot of stress, and then someone is like wiggling back, and instead of just peacefully subduing him against a suspect, you just smash his head into the concrete. That guy could be a good guy otherwise, but that guy's got to answer for what he did. You can't just do that. You can't just smash a dude's head into the ground. And
right.
It's like,
because if anybody else did that, we would be arrested in like 4 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So, I believe that most police officers are good people, but I also believe there is a severe problem with holding police accountable in this country.
Yeah.
Um,
And I honestly think like
and the term qualified immunity.
yeah, so I honestly think as far as like the good people, I would say neutral. I don't think that most people in the world are good people, to be honest. And that applies to cops too. I think most people are neutral. They don't want to really do a lot of harm, but they're not going to go out of their way to prevent it. So, for example, I think the average person has a low percentage chance of intervening if someone else is getting hurt. Not super low, but oh my gosh, don't hit him. What are you doing? Maybe something but that's not it. Like a 50-50. I think with a cop, it's like a 5% chance or less because not because there's anything different in the human being behind the uniform than the other human being, but because if they aren't a team player, then they start getting passed up for raises and promotions and things like that. There's this whole like band of brothers kind of thing, that this whole culture of we protect our own, and those people out there we're supposed to protect are not our own. And that's something that really needs to go. And right now, you've seen a lot of police departments. There's a lot of footage of police departments and officers standing in solidarity. There's some video of during a protest, some protester was on her knees with her hands up and got shoved to the ground by another cop, and then a fellow cop blocked him off, said, no, don't do that or whatever, which is like, I've never seen that before in my life. It's basically because it doesn't happen. They basically just protect each other's, in that way, there are no purely good cops, or there weren't any. There are very few that would actually step in against a fellow doing in an act of abuse. And a lot of that's probably fear-based, right? They don't want to expose themselves. But now that we have this tide clearly shifting. Now it's kind of like you can be more. It's not as, you don't have to be as courageous to stand up against your fellows doing abusive things. So that's kind of the summary of the entire situation. Except now it's got turned into something quite different. It's definitely, so here's what in my mind what happened. Right, you have a lot of protests, a lot of frustration. Probably a certain degree of violence, not just against police, against whatever, but also some kind of random violence and looting, just because of the amount of frustrations, the size of the movement, all that kind of stuff. All that together basically makes it a tinderbox for something to really explode and catch on fire. And of course, that's not excusing any of that. If you're a looter, you're a piece of shit. Sorry. If you burned and destroyed someone else's property, if you're violent in this case, especially it's so ironic to protest violence with more violence. That's no good. But it's not the amount of burning and looting and violence and all that stuff. I think has been way out of proportion to what one could expect from this level of frustration. And there's been a lot of, and I've seen like dozens of videos of this already, of Antifa basically provoking things. And of course, that's a loose term, but basically bandanaed, for lack of a better term, skinny white people coming up and breaking things, throwing bricks, bringing pallets of bricks, handing them to other basically trying to instigate more violence and destruction. And there have been a few videos of Black Lives Matter protesters saying, "What the hell are you doing? Why are you breaking?" Trying to stop them from doing that. There was one where a car driving out, they were handed a brick, like, "Here you go. Here's a brick to start break something." And he's like, "What are you doing? I'm just here to protest police violence. I don't want a brick. What are you talking about?" So there's a lot of that going on too. And then of course, that violence begets violence, and things escalate, and things burn, and things get looted, and yeah. Do you remember all the businesses that shut down? Guess what? More are shutting down.
Yeah, now they're burned down. Yeah, so I mean, in looting and rioting in cities disproportionately affects the very people they're trying to protest for, right? Because that's cities are disproportionately more minority than suburbs and in the rural zones.
Yeah,
Like I
typically
live in, I mean, New Hampshire is like 96% white or whatever it is.
something
Um,
hilarious. Yeah,
but most of the minority families live in, probably Manchester and Nashua because it's just I don't know why that ends up happening, but it always ends up happening. Um, so when you go in and burn down these cities, you're harming the very people you claim to be trying to help.
absolutely.
And like you're burning down like Target and Rite Aid, where I assume most people shop. So, like, and now the people in that community can't get their prescriptions because Target, Walmart, Rite Aid are all closed, result of all the looting and rioting. So you're literally causing more harm than good,
Yeah,
causing pretty much zero good by burning down your community. Just to put that out there, right? And especially like there's the video of the business owner who's trying. I assume he's the business owner. He's trying to defend his business with a sword, and
he has the crap kicked
he's
out of
he's
him.
defending his business, and he makes one. And he gets the shit kicked out of him, like to within an inch of his life. And I don't know, maybe he died in the hospital because I
Critical
saw a bunch of
condition
people tweeting that
is,
he died.
yeah, that's what I heard last. But yeah, it's rough, and that's a thing.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad. I hope he pulls through.
And that's the unfortunate part of the situation is if you're a random business owner, you didn't ask for trouble, and now you're the one who's going to be suffering more than anyone. And also, you unfortunately trusted government in your community too much in most cases. So maybe you have a sword somewhere on the premises, but that's it. Guess what? Gats are what you need. You need to be armed. You need to defend yourself because the police are never going to defend you. Just it's not going to happen. They're there for cleanup. They're there for, maybe for backup. But if you're that's the thing about the police are not first responders. I'm sorry. You are your first responder. Your neighbor is your first responder.
Correct.
There's not they're the cleanup crew, the
Absolutely.
10 minutes later, the 15 minutes later. So I have to transition to the most gorgeous
Or
of
or in
memes.
case of like Minneapolis, of course, in like Minneapolis, they just like completely cede the ground. They're like, all right, we're going to vacate the third precinct. We're not going to have cops anywhere in the area, and we're just going to let the rioters burn the police station to the ground. I mean, that's if you're depending on police to protect your life or your business, you are sorely mistaken on what their job actually is. Their job is to prosecute, to arrest people that committed crimes, like you said, the cleanup crew, right? They come in after the fact. Like there's a murder, they come in, they investigate, they arrest the murderer, maybe. Um, but if you want to protect your life, then you need to be armed. And I've been armed for, I mean, I've bought my first gun. I was 22 or 23, and I've been armed ever since. I don't train as often as I'd like, but you need to be armed. You need to train yourself or get trained, be responsible. Don't give the rest of us a bad. I just retweeted a glorious thread on this, right? Um, about, I mean, 2020 is like going to be a banner year for gun sales. It's probably going
Oh
to break
yeah.
every record there ever was. Because at the beginning of the stay-at-home orders, people, I know like at least a dozen that I personally know, first-time gun owners as a result of the stay-at-home orders because people assumed that rioting and looting and other stuff might follow, which there wasn't a lot of, which is a good thing. And now, because there's actually rioting and looting and madness and mayhem, there's a lot more people that are looking to be first-time gun owners. Even those people on the quote unquote left that generally agree with gun control are like, maybe I should get a gun because there's no one here to protect me.
Yeah, which kind of brings us to our first meme of the day. Which, by the way, I remember when we started putting like news stories here, and then pretty soon it just devolved into all memes because rather than just some
Yeah, we're just
crappy
meme warfare.
MSNBC screenshot or something with just oh let's read what this headline says. It's like a picture's worth 1,000 words, and a word picture is worth 10,000 words. So here we go. Here's a picture of a couple of armed shop owners of an Italian bakery. Said, "Mess with the biscotti, you get the shoddy." Yeah, which I think is a beautiful thing.
I love that meme. I love
Shout
it.
out to Mike for sending it to me, or my good old Sicilian buddy.
I mean, it looks like a Sparrow, but I don't know if they have like
Yeah, it's an Italian
maybe it's
bakery.
just a general. Yeah,
Yeah, so I've seen the video that's
but good
associated
for
with
them,
this.
right?
In the video, like right now, you see two people with rifles of sorts. Looks like shotguns. But in the actual video, there's like four of them that end up coming out, and they're all with long guns, and they're pointing at the or they're not. They're presenting. They're not pointing them at protesters, but rioters are going around them, and then they're smashing the next windows and stuff. But they're literally just going like they come up and they kind of and then they kind of like move away. But so, and this is where I guess I'm not that smart of a person because they did the smart thing. I would have probably tried to do more than just protect the business and probably shoot at some of these people, some warning shots, whatever, to get them off the street. But that probably would not have ended well for me. So I'm an idiot. Don't take my advice. But it's still an awesome.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean, definitely go out there. If you are, if you own a business in one of these cities, like even Manchester or Nashua, or like Hampton Beach, there's a BLM rally, I think, right now on Hampton Beach, or an Antifa rally. I don't know. I'm sure there's some of each group there. But if you have arms, which a lot of New Hampshire does, and there's no record of who does or how many there are, and you want to stand out in front of your business, just kind of like first line of defense, right? Like, all right, you mess with this, you want to come over here. Here's
Yeah.
here's what you're looking at.
You got the boom boom.
But it's important, like, you don't want to be the aggressor in that situation, right? New Hampshire is a castle doctrine state, which means you don't have to retreat. You can stand your ground and defend your property, your life, liberty, and property, which is what our New Hampshire Article 2-A says. All persons have the right to keep and bear arms. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not quoting it directly. So the constitutional scholars watching don't jump down my throat. In defense of your life, property, and the state, I believe it is, right? So, and there's another New Hampshire law that any able-bodied male over the age of 18 is part of the New Hampshire militia. So, those two things can go together. And if, an armed insurrection breaks out in downtown Manchester, then, anybody could go out in defense of the state. But it's really not a best practice to like be, solo, running down Elm Street, blasting at Antifa rioters. That's not what I'm advocating. Don't do that. But absolutely defend your own life, liberty, and property with every means necessary. If they come after your life, liberty, or property, then you have every right to defend that with, firearms or whatever you got. But just don't be the aggressor. Don't go out there and like challenge these Antifa or rioters, or don't be the aggressor, because there's a whole slew of problems behind that. But it's, particularly like the NAP, non-aggression principle. But you get what I'm saying.
Yes, and I happen to be the key, I guess, libertarian ethos is, of course, personal responsibility, on the fair kind of Randian sort of thing about you're responsible for you and yours, and that's it. And so I kind of take a more broader spectrum of that, where I do believe that that's all that you should be held accountable for as a person. Individually, you should be held accountable for your individual self and your individual household. I do believe beyond accountability and ownership, there's a little bit more of a responsibility, a community responsibility. Whereas if you see someone on the street who's poor and has nothing, and you should help them, or you're a piece of shit. It doesn't mean you should be dragged off in cuffs. Doesn't mean someone should steal your property. Doesn't mean whatever. It just, you should probably do something for your community. And so, for example, if you see your neighbor's shop being looted, sure, if you you only have the firepower to defend your shop, do that first. But if you can spare some, chase them away from your neighbor too. Just, hey, get out of the way. And that's one thing we've noticed. So let me explain for the viewers at home, because I know that it's a little bit more of an inside joke slash now movement and now something hitting headlines is what is the Boogaloo? So the Boogaloo is basically it's basically a modern memeified version of 1776 will commence again. It's kind of that sort of idea of armed armed insurrection against a tyrannical government by patriots who believe in a free America. That's basically it's what every single person who talks about the Second Amendment in any kind of a positive way says. Except it's just more of a, but it's turned into a little bit of a meme joke format where you have a bunch of people sharing like funny memes and images and stuff of like people armed to the teeth with like tactical gear and night vision goggles and like all this kind of like gun nerd stuff and Hawaiian shirts for some reason. I don't know why, just to make it fun, and with some kind of like just like jokes about we can't wait for the revolution type things. Now, a lot what the term for said folks tend to be boog boys, and there have been quite a few. I've seen a few. Obviously, I think it's an extreme minority, but there's been a recorded instance of a handful of boog boys standing outside, armed to the teeth, silently, standing guard in front of business owners, or just basically being there as a buffer against violence and things like that. Just kind of like, well, we're the armed militia. We're going to be there in case something bad happens, but we're going to hopefully nothing bad happens because if you're a shop owner, you're protecting your shop with your firearms. If you don't have a shop, but you do have a lot of firearms, why not go out there and stand in front of other shops whose owners do not have firearms and then just mitigate more violence, keep more violence from happening? And of course, it's one of the best things that's coming out of this whole thing, and albeit at a very small bit. And a lot of people on Twitter are losing it overseeing, a lot of lefties on Twitter, let's be honest, are losing it overseeing peacefully armed people trying to make a difference in their community today and prevent violence and destruction from happening. So that's where we get to our next meme of the day, where if you can't read it from here, there's like the crying purple-haired leftist type person saying, "No, how can you just come to our protest, stand guard for us against police and for small business owners against looters, regardless of our age, gender, sexuality, or race? You're supposed to be far right, white nationalist Nazi." And the other person, in parentheses, puffs cigarette in silence. So, yes, there's this. I'm really fascinated how the gun conversation is changing so rapidly, because for a while it was, oh, you must be a right winger, we need sensible things here and there. And then there was the school shooting hysteria, which every school shooting is a terrible tragedy. Let's, whatever. But there was that hysteria of like, if you own guns, you're murdering children. We have to ban them all to stop children from being murdered on a daily basis. If you own a gun, it's murdering children while you're sleeping.
Yeah, if it saves just one life.
Yeah,
if it saves just one life. And I think one of the important things is, right, one of the common retorts against, gun freedom, or the Second Amendment is, only the police should have guns. And now, literally, in all of these protests, they're protesting police violence. So is it only the police should have guns, or is it maybe the police shouldn't have guns, or is it maybe everybody should have a gun and just, not count on the police?
Yeah, more importantly,
which is it? Because it can't be all three.
I would say everyone should be, pretty much everyone, well, let's just be honest, everyone should be able to have a gun. Only responsible people should actively pursue and be encouraged to get those. But anyone who's responsible, like...
Correct. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and so, like, honestly, like as far as like any kind of armament, probably half of people at least should be armed of some kind, especially vulnerable.
Yeah,
people.
I mean, even if it's pepper spray, a pepper spray or a knife or something,
or knife hands,
you gotta have something. And I mean, if you're Al Baldessaro, you only need a thumb. But I weigh like 125 pounds, soaking wet, and I'm not messing around, right? You come at me, and what's the fuck around and find out.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. With the
hopefully, I
grenade.
never have to put that. Well, I mean, whatever. Um, I take the Second Amendment quite literally. So, uh, any. So here's the thing, right? With we prohibit so many people from having firearms. There's like a ton of like prohibitions. Like if you use marijuana, you're federally prohibited from owning a firearm.
We just don't.
Um, which is it's stupid. If you have an alcohol problem, you're federally prohibited from owning a firearm. Which I mean,
That makes
on its
sense,
face makes
but
sense, but I
the
don't think that's
enforcement
for the
thereof,
government to decide.
yeah, the enforcement thereof doesn't make sense. And that's why it's like
Right.
the ability to, so every single time you place a restriction on something, it lessens people's,
I have to go get my wild dog. I'll be right
yeah, no,
back.
but I'll rant. And so anytime you put a restriction on someone doing a thing at all, even if the people wanting to participate aren't in the restricted category, that still makes them not want to do it. So for example, if I want to go, you know, buy a, I mean, this happens, as I was saying about like every time you have a restriction in place, even if it doesn't apply to you, it still makes you more leery of doing things. So, for example, I, for the last for over a decade now, I have been what in the U.S. is counted as legal drinking age, and I do enjoy a drink. I enjoy a few a week, in fact. However, there are some situations where I don't, where I hesitate from buying alcohol because of the extra step of producing my ID. It doesn't mean I have anything wrong with doing it. It doesn't mean I get upset. It's just like the, oh god, I gotta like for example, what if you're checking out and like at the grocery, you're like, oh, why don't I bring this bottle of wine? I would like to cook with it, and you put it in there, and then they gotta like, oh, can I see your ID? Let's call someone over to help the kid cashier do whatever. It's like, okay, maybe I won't put the bottle of wine in. Just every little thing like that. And of course, if you're like buying a gun, it's like, all right, well, let's see this. Let's fill out a form. Let's waiting period. I'm not gonna do it. Most people, and so the bad people, of course, don't get deterred as easily. And obviously, like Antifa and their big stacks of bricks and Molotov cocktails and all that kind of things. So you still find a way to make bad things happen. Now, I don't believe that there are those kinds of things. I do believe that, again, personal responsibility of a business owner who's selling firearms should be, don't sell it to weird people. Don't sell it to people that just seem like there's something wrong with them. And, community responsibility. And that's the one thing where it gets a little dicier is what would you do in a perfect anarchy paradise thing if you know someone who's mentally unstable has a gun? And I don't know what the community-wide answer is. What I would do is I would find a way to get that person away from their gun, even though that's their right to own it on a personal level. And I don't know, does that make me a bad person? I don't know. But that's a much deeper discussion. Right now, anyway, we're talking about responsible firearms ownership and how it has helped, how the conversation has shifted now with people afraid because of the whole COVID-19 issue, that a lot of lefties were running after guns. They just want, oh, can I have guns? And they're like, wait, I have to wait how long? I have to produce this? I have to what? Background checks? Like I thought you could just go to Walmart and buy a belt-fed machine gun and like a bunch of cases. I just thought you could just go do that, and it was like $40. And now the lefties were finding out that it's much harder than they had actually thought. But also they're actually saying like, okay, look, I'm scared for my family and myself, and that trumps politics. And therefore, even though I'm anti-gun, I am now pro-gun because I want one. Which is a very reasonable kind of response. Now you're seeing this situation, and holy crap, are we going to see more people owning guns? This might be, and especially because a lot of the violence has been perpetrated by or instigated by, of course, there's a lot of, bad people, a lot of just criminal people who just took advantage of a riot to go loot stuff. Like, there's just a lot of that out there. But there's also a lot of expressly perpetrated violence by instigators who come armed with pallets of bricks and things like that to throw at things. And those people obviously are causing a lot of damage without guns. and guns are stopping them wherever they are, where, we're making them hesitate. I don't think there's been a lot of shootings that I've noticed. Again, this is a country.
There's been a few.
Yeah, this is a huge country. There's a lot of stuff going on. I can't keep up. No one in the world knows everything that's happening everywhere, obviously. There's been limited of that compared to all the rest. So I think it's going to really twist the gun battle thingy, especially because you have a lot of armed people coming out to try to prevent violence from happening. These, I would say, socially left position, what was formerly called that, which now I think is just a human position of police brutality. And so that takes us to the final meme of the day. Good old Lord of the Rings meme of that. Boog boys or Boogaloo boys. Never thought I'd Boogaloo side by side with BLM, Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives Matter rioters. Says, what about side by a friend? I could do that. Which obviously there's a lot of layers. It's a joke. It's a meme. Who cares? Don't get angry at memes. But there's an interest.
The Lord of the Rings fans might come out and be real mad at that. But I think so. I was just going to mention this after your last what you said just there, and one of my favorite videos I think of this whole thing far.
Mm-hmm.
Not that there's a lot of good videos to choose from because most of it is just destruction, but there were these rioters and they had burned down a police cruiser and they smashed in the back window, and one of the rioters said, "Oh, look, there's a rifle there." And he pulls the rifle out, and it's an AR-15 variant. It might be an MP4, depends on the police station, the police department. Yeah. So an MP4 is like the automatic version of AR-15 is the semi-automatic version of an MP4, basically. So he has this rifle. It looks like an AR-15. He pulls it out of the police cruiser, and he's kind of like trying to figure out what to do with it. And all of a sudden, I guess you could describe him as a boog boy, but maybe not. I don't want to put that on him if he's not. There's this bald-headed guy with a thick black beard. He's got an AR-15 strapped to his chest and a pistol in his hand, and he comes bolting across the street, screaming at the guy, "Put the weapon down, put the weapon down, put the weapon down." And he's on the guy before the guy even knows what happens, right? Like this protester probably crapped in his pants. He was probably like a 20-year-old soy boy or whatever. And
yeah.
So all of a sudden, the guy grabs the rifle from his hand, knocks him to the ground, drops the magazine, checks the chamber, holds onto it, and like goes on about his day. And I found we heard follow up on that.
Police,
he did
right?
call. He returned it to the police, which I mean, he was on national TV when he disarmed somebody. So
they're gonna find out.
But he was just full on like badass, right? Like
yeah,
he took action, didn't hesitate. And he just went in. He disarmed the rioter from having this firearm because, I mean, if you're rioting and burning down police cars, then probably shouldn't have a firearm. And he took action, probably saved a life or two. Who knows?
Yeah, and I believe he was former military, private security, and
yes, he was a Marine and private security.
Yeah, so that's exactly the kind of behavior that could kind of help things out. Again, guns are a tool. If you have them, you can do good things with them. You can do horrible things with them. They're for killing people, and people who have tendencies to want to kill innocent people should probably be kept away from them peacefully in whatever way. But like, that's one of those like on the ground situation type things of someone who's clearly in a position who is going to cause some violence and harm, or very high likelihood of that, is now in possession of something that amplifies his ability to do so. So someone else who has that comes in, uses his firearms without hurting anyone, it's a very tricky thing to do, but it can be done. It's the main purpose, in my view, it's the main purpose of having a firearm is to use it without actually hurting anyone and without actually firing a shot.
Mm-hmm.
So he comes in, removes the threat, doesn't hurt the other guy, and just kind of neutralize it. Now, Do I think that guy would be a hero if he goes and finds out where this dude lives at a future date, hears that this guy is now in possession of a gun, and then kicks down his door and goes and confiscates his guns? No, that's a completely different situation. So it's kind of like it's like a combat situation versus a just broad-based ownership type situation, and that's what.
Right.
Yeah.
The use of force is only justified in an immediate threat situation. Right. So like like George Floyd was dragged from his car and they knelt on his neck. And I saw a tweet earlier from a New Hampshire journalist who said every police chief that he's talked to says that neck restraint is literally only acceptable in an immediate force situation. So if there's a imminent harm or imminent threat of harm to bodily injury. So
Yeah, in fact, John
and
Jones, who's
I hold that pretty much across the board.
so John Jones is, depending on how contrary goes, he's the god, either current or former UFC light heavyweight champion, probably one of the most dangerous people in unarmed combat in the entire planet, like top couple, like, and he first off says that of all the people he's choked out, like that move is more painful than anything else, anything that he actually does when he chokes people out for a living. Also, he's been running around the streets of Albuquerque. You know, he's like a 6'4", 230 or so pound guy, and there's footage of him running up to guys with like protesters with paint canisters and taking those away from them and yelling at them saying you should be ashamed of yourselves and stuff like that. And like, you know, of course that's a scary guy to be doing stuff. And I have seen video of John Jones getting his AR game on as well. So I would not want to mess with this guy. But I mean, he's had his own share of run-ins with the law and stupid decisions and stuff in his past. But I'm glad to see him standing up and taking personal risk and trying to help his community in this case. And it's a crazy, crazy world out there. I think we're going to learn a lot about where theory and practice kind of meet. And that goes to Antifa being declared a terrorist organization by the president in a tweet, which I don't know what the actual process of an official declaration is, what that constitutes, who is Antifa, who isn't. There's a hashtag trending on Twitter because Twitter is where all the awfulness happens in the world. Not all of it, but some of it. That's hashtag I am Antifa, with all the leftists basically just saying, in all this chaos and destruction and awfulness in the world, you know who's the problem? Trump and his mean, nasty tweets. And just, Now, to kind of put a little something behind what there's some credence behind this idea, the process of declaring something a terrorist organization could possibly be very harmful to like a precedent of, if someone is just like, what next? Are Boog Boys going to be are the Boogaloo people, are they going to be declared a terrorist organization despite being the complete opposite? Like, and what is going to happen? Are they going to have their guns confiscated? Like, what's going to happen? So for that reason, I'm very skeptical.
I mean, you go back to Waco, right? Go back to Waco in 1993, I think it was, and I mean, it was kind of weird what was going on there, but did it warrant the FBI and the ATF coming in for a 63 or 73 or 53? I don't remember the exact amount of days, but it was like a 2-month siege on this compound where these people were just trying to like live their lives in peace. And I think there were some, weird like child sex things going on there.
Probably.
But they went in and literally killed the children that were the victims they were trying to save.
Yeah.
The government is not going to protect you from. It's so like they were like, oh, I mean, we think there's illegal guns in there, and we think children are being molested. So let's send in a tank to burn down the compound and kill all the children.
And
like,
pose,
give me a break.
And pose with the charred corpses of the people. Yeah. People forget about that.
Yeah, I mean, and it all started out with them killing dogs. So, that's. I mean, there's a lot of memes been going on around.
Yeah,
about that lately. The Fed boys coming in killing dogs.
There's a deep-seated problem when you start justifying crazy actions. And like war is something crazy, right? War is first off, obviously it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's one of the worst things that can happen in the world, other than like an actual pandemic type thing that wipes out 95% of the population. Like war is one of the worst things possible.
Oh wait, so you're not talking about coronavirus? You're talking about a
What's
real
that?
pandemic?
I hadn't heard of that. What is that? I'm just
What,
saying.
the coronavirus? Yeah, all of a sudden it disappeared, right?
Yeah, of course.
Hey, look, thousands of people can gather together in the streets, and nobody's talking about how dangerous it is because of the coronavirus.
You know, it's a have you ever watched The Princess Bride?
More than once, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember? It's like, where's the key? Oh, I know of no key. Go break his arms. Oh, you mean this key? That whole scene reminded me of, what was it, in North Carolina or whatever? They were saying, protesting is a non-essential activity, and then it's like Black Lives Matter protest showed up. Oh no, you mean that? No, that's fine. That protesting is fine. It just, if you're protesting, hey,
Yeah.
I'm starving to death. Okay, that's not a good protest. Oh, but like I'm fed up.
And
Yeah.
specifically, right? Specifically, candidate for governor, we'll call him Commissar Valinsky because, and so like after the last reopened New Hampshire protest, it might have been the church service they held on State House grounds. He tweeted, Governor Sununu needs to, stand up to these protesters and tell them how dangerous it is, and all the good stuff, like, oh, they're just gonna kill Granny. And after, on Saturday, there was a BLM protest in Manchester, and Andy Valinsky decided he was going to attend, and he wore his little mask, and it looks in the picture that he posted, at least he's 6 feet away from everybody else, but he says, oh, I'm proud to stand with thousands of people in Manchester, blah, 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 blah. So like 100 people that want freedom from the government is a bad protest and will kill Granny, but a couple thousand people that don't want to be killed by police, that one's okay.
Yeah, and it goes to the root of the thing of, yes, protesting is an essential activity. And what I think was sort of agreed upon by the powers that be in this case is, all right, this is really serious. This is a problem that's plagued this nation for, hundreds of years, you could say, is the plight of the black man and the plight of police brutality, of course. It's like an actual big problem that's boiling over, and we have to be present for that. We have to understand that this needs to be taken seriously. And that is something that, and it's like, even if some people increase their risk of some, fantasy virus, again, it's not a fantasy virus, it exists, it kills people, okay. But as far as a threat, that's what I'm talking about, fantasy. As far as that's concerned, like, oh yeah, sure, we'll put that on hold. So what if it spreads some, and it's worth it in this case? All right, I agree with that. Now, what I also agree with, it's even more worth it in the case of, we need to feed ourselves. We need to go to work. We need to create economic growth. We need to be able to support ourselves and have enough left over, hopefully, to support other people. We need to not have wide-scale poverty, panic, starvation, other kinds of issues, societal collapse, whatever the hell is coming down the road. We can't afford to have that. Therefore, getting the super sniffle and passing that along, even though it can kill some people, is definitely an acceptable risk. When the other thing is, hey, anecdotal evidence time. Someone on the Joe Rogan podcast was talking about a local police chief somewhere said that they used to get like a suicide a week or suicide a month or something, and then they were now getting 5 a day. And like the suicide rates have gone through the roof in this whole thing. That's costing lives. And so, yeah, protest is an essential activity. If you're willing to go out there en masse, you definitely deserve to be heard. And so, to wrap this whole idea up, essentially, we've been told for however long, all kinds of things of, well, what was this guy doing out at night? What was he doing here? Oh, we found history of petty thefts and crimes and things. Therefore, he got murdered by police. Yeah, but come on, he was a bad guy. Or like, don't you believe in backing our first responders? Or just there's been all this kind of nonsense excuses around people are getting murdered and murder isn't good. And finally, it boiled over to, I mean, maybe I'm an optimist. I think this is probably the last time we see some big thing. I think we're going to see some actual change this time. It just got too crazy. And maybe not permanent actual change, but enough actual change to like make things a little better for a while. So we have that. But then,
Well, in good news in New Hampshire, right? So let me jump off of that for a second because people in New Hampshire have been working on this for years, right? I mean, people across the country have been working on it for years too. But in New Hampshire, we've actually been able to accomplish some good things. So, I'll give a shout out to Carla Garrick from Manchester. She is, big on police accountability. She has sued a few different police departments in the state. She won against the Ware Police Department for wrongful imprisonment, and she got a settlement from that. It was based on her video recording police officers in their official line of duty. And the federal court for the U.S. District 1 ruled that that was constitutional. So now anybody can record police in their official line of duty without, well, hopefully without fear of being arrested or anything like that. And she's worked on various angles of police accountability. So shout out to Carla if she sees this. But other people too in the legislature have worked on various angles, like getting the Laurie list public. And if you don't know what the Laurie list is, the police departments, excuse me, police departments keep a list of officers with less than stellar records or problems, and they keep this list because of a certain court ruling, right? So if I'm a cop and I have a bad history, like let's say I have multiple excessive force complaints, that goes on my record, and the district attorneys are required to turn that information over to the defense attorneys so that you can impeach their character on the stand. So you get cop A, who's a great cop, and cop B, who has a few complaints in his file. And cop B makes this arrest and finds a bunch of marijuana and blah, 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 whatever. And they put him on the stand and you say, well, wait a minute, haven't you yourself been arrested for marijuana possession? And haven't you also been accused of excessive force? And haven't you also been accused of planting evidence? And all those accusations are kept in that file because the defense attorney has a right to see them. And so there have been people working on getting the Laurie list public, because what happens in a lot of cases is you get a complaint in one town and they fire you or they allow you to resign, and then you just go work in another town. But that record still follows you. You're in a new town and what blah, 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 blah. So on Friday, I think it was, the Supreme Court of New Hampshire overturned the decades-long precedent of keeping certain personnel records private. And so now the case is going back to Superior Court for further ruling, but it looks like the Laurie list might be able to finally become public so that the people of New Hampshire will be able to know where these, we always say, like people that defend the police as a whole generally always say, yes, there's a few bad apples, but most police are good, right? That's like the basic talking point. Okay, well, if there are a few bad apples, then we need to know about them as soon as possible and get them off the police force because they don't belong in the job, right? If they're a bad apple, get rid of them because a bad apple will spoil the whole bunch if you leave it there long enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's what happened with Derek Chauvin in Minnesota. I mean, the guy has killed 3 people now and has 18 complaints for excessive force. Been on the force. I mean, in what's her name?
Klobuchar.
Klondike Bar out in Minnesota. Was the state attorney general or something, and could have prosecuted him very, very early on and declined to. And then because she was running for Senate, and now she's been in the Senate since 2008, 6, something like that. And he's still never been prosecuted for any of those excessive force complaints. So like, if you have a bad apple, get rid of it. And if you get rid of the bad apples at the beginning, and most police end up being actually good police officers, then most of these like complaints will go away, right?
Absolutely. Now, it's a multifaceted thing. We obviously should probably do something about qualified immunity. Another thing I would like to see is
Definitely.
abuse settlements, abuse case settle, which is bad. You know how hard it is to actually win like a police abuse case and get a settlement out of it, but to make the settlement go out of the offending party's actual pockets and not the police department, who then just throws it back on the taxpayer. So the very people whose child was murdered by the police now have to pay more to the police department to pay them back again. So those are a few good first steps. I hope that this is a time when we actually get some movement on that. Hopefully this is a time when we get some movement on, yeah, let's just reopen all the states because we have bigger fish to fry. And hopefully this is a time everyone who is not a psychopath buys a gun, knows how to use it, and gets in contact with other people who also have one and know how to use it, and just get ready to defend themselves in their communities, hopefully with no force at all, whenever something like this kind of happens. Because I would absolutely love to see looting just shut down. Like, it just boggles my mind that you can just break things, hurt people, and steal things under certain conditions. Just no rhyme or reason. No, well, it was a bad neighborhood, or well, it was in the cover of night. Just like you just run up and start breaking stuff and stealing things. That is pretty horrific. And I know that that's not going to happen. These aren't economically, I mean, but this way, probably not economically desperate people. At least that's not the motivation behind that. Although there's a lot more of those out these days than there were just a few months ago. But this is a lot of opportunistic, kind of like senseless behavior. And if they have to face down the barrel of a shotgun when they do this, they're not going to do this. It's just pretty much that simple. And those who will be taken out of the gene pool. And there you go. Peace again. Because we can't have any more economic destruction. We've had so much already. You can't have any more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not advocating for violence of any kind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that we should go take these idiots out of the gene pool. But if they came to my house with the intent of destroying something, they would be taken out of the gene pool, because my family, I'm going to put the safety of my family above anything else. Mm-hmm. That's my job as a husband and a father, right? If you ever intend on harming them, you will be put in the ground, or you'll have to harm them over my dead body. One of the two. So, and that's the basic, we all have a basic right to self-defense, God-given right to self-defense. It's a quote unquote natural right. You have the absolute right to defend your life and the life of your family against any form of aggression. And I don't care what anybody says. And if whatever tools you need to be able to do that, you have a right to acquire them. Mm-hmm. The Second Amendment specifically refers to the people's God-given right to defend themselves against tyranny. But it also carries everything below that, like self-defense from crime, self-defense from everything else. So it's specifically, it's not like a hunting bill. Like, nobody wrote the Second Amendment like, oh, you can go hunt some deer on the weekend. Like, no, that's not what it's for. The Second Amendment is written to defend yourself from tyranny and acts of aggression, particularly from the government, because the Constitution is a government restraining document. But so if you, that's why I think machine guns should be legal. And the free market will make them not as available as you think, because you don't want like the crazy Antifa people with machine guns. Imagine what downtown Minneapolis would look right now. But they should have the right to have that. Not saying they should have that. Defending, it's people. Some people get upset like when you take a principled liberty stance on the Second Amendment. Like, yes, everybody has the right to own a firearm, and you're like, well, and then they automatically go to the emotional red herring, like, well, what about Johnny who beats his wife? well, I don't think Johnny should have a gun, but it's still his right to have one. And there are other ways to keep a firearm out of his hands than with a set of laws that restricts everybody from having firearms.
Yeah, that's a tough situation to talk about the rights of people we don't like. And for example, who has a right to breathe? Everyone, I think, until you stop enough other people from breathing, and the only way to stop you from stopping other people from breathing is to stop you from breathing. Is in the only way to stop you from killing other people is to end your miserable existence. Okay, maybe there. But like as far as like a right, everyone should have the right to breathe. And that's where we got in the situation to begin with. The whole I can't breathe thing. It's like, well, but he had some petty crime stuff. Oh, history of some cocaine abuse. Oh, look, he was overweight. Like there's just all this. Yeah, I mean, oh, he was a thug anyway. Whatever. Oh, he was, again, mixing stories up a little bit. Oh, now he was shuffling around, trespassing in some construction site. You just got to die. It's like now you start getting situations where people, you start deciding who can and can't live. And then, oh, what happens if someone has a history of violence or whatever? What do they like lose their right to make a living now? Like, sure, they should be fired from whatever job or whatever
Yeah, well,
when
and
they're caught. But like, at what point do you start taking away people's like everything? And more importantly, who decides these things? And that's the biggest thing where I turned hard towards liberty. Oh, they'll go. The older I got, the more I figured stuff out. Is whenever you make a law about stuff, whenever you take away someone's rights, you basically give someone else the power to do that with relative impunity. And that's the problem. Is I don't want government with that kind of power. I don't want any of that stuff.
correct.
And like I would rather all my worst enemies be able to be armed to the teeth with impunity than to give government the right to take those weapons away from them that would make me feel safer. Because government would do infinitely worse and has done infinitely worse with that kind of power. And of course, and the people I hate would still have guns. They would still find a way to get them because government is incompetent. So that's just kind of my my sort of ranty position on that.
No, and I agree. And like I said earlier, the only justification for the use of force, somebody just commented, last I heard, even forgery was not a capital offense, and of course it's not, right? The only justified use of force, in my opinion, is active violence or an active threat of violence, right? So if I feel as if somebody is process of actively trying to harm me, my family, or my property, then that would be a justified time for force. And not everything requires deadly force. There's other ways to subdue threats. And I think in every case possible, you should take the my family or my property. Then that would be a justified use the minimal amount of force required to subdue a threat. But I don't even believe in capital punishment on the government level, right? I don't think the government should have the power to decide to take away somebody's life, even if it's through a jury of their peers, because the government screws up literally all the time.
Yeah, and that's where it gets, for a lot of people, that can get a little dicey. But I'm completely on board with that because I don't have anything wrong with the concept of capital punishment as a whole. Of if you're that horrible of a person, you kind of forfeited your ability to live or whatever. But it's just that who gets to decide and enforce that? The fact that anyone gets to decide and enforce that at all, anyone, is just terrible. So absolutely not on that part. And so it's one of those things of where, like, oh, I think that everyone should be able to afford basic healthcare needs. Yeah, I believe that. I think everyone should have access to an education. I believe that too. I believe everyone, a lot of just long laundry list of things. But then it's like, all right, what are you going to do about it? Well, make a better, more prosperous world so it's easier to, afford this kind of stuff, remove barriers to this, maybe start a foundation and work on like, okay, there's a bunch of stuff. But as soon as you start saying, let's tell the government that they're going to, no, all of a sudden, no, it just, that's at the point where it just becomes terrible. You just say, oh, therefore, and then like the public education system is a giant joke, including the public university system. And there's just like, and it's so ridiculous. It's not just people like me who are homeschooled and gotten into finished college at 19 and stuff like that, but just the levels of like waste, how much they're spending per student at even at the absolute worst schools in the world, and versus how much private school tuition is, what results are, just like just everything is such a disaster that I would not throw a single more dollar into that. And so, of course, that expands to every other area of the world, including keeping us safe, including gun confiscation type things, and just trying to protect people. The entire idea behind government is, yeah, you see like looting and violence and stuff like that. We're going to like take some of your money and we're going to stop that from happening. Well, guess what? People are rioting because the government has murdered so many people. And now there's looting and rioting everywhere, and cops are nowhere to be seen. In fact, they're sitting like 20 feet away from some looting, just watching it. They're not have nothing to do with that. So, yeah. To wrap up my
we
last
see that
point
with
for the
school,
day.
with school shooting. Yeah.
Yeah. To wrap up my last point for the day. Take everything into your own hands. Protect yourself. Make your own money. Defend your communities, because otherwise someone's going to make government do this kind of stuff for you. They're going to ruin it, and they're going to ruin everything else too.
Yeah, and I hope that this doesn't have the counter effect. Like they're protesting, and well, the protesters are looking for less police violence. The rioters are just causing mayhem. Every time this happens, it seems to grow government and not shrink it. And we're trying to shrink the government here and hold them accountable. So hopefully this doesn't have, the opposite effect that we're looking for. So keep your eye on the prize. Looting and rioting is not helping your cause. It's actually hurting it. And, keep protesting, call your representatives, both parties, get them on board with criminal justice reform, stop civil asset forfeiture, stop. If we could decriminalize like a few dozen other things, then there would be less interactions with police to begin with. And there would be less time for abuse and qualified immunity. Make it so officers can be held personally liable, monetarily and criminally. And, those are some good steps that we can take to start turning this in the right direction and save some lives in the process.
And get strapped. Get strapped.
Get strapped. Well, stay strapped or get clapped. I think that's the saying.
Yeah.
So
stay strapped or get clapped. Subscribe.
Be responsible.
Donate,
get trained.
Donate.
Buy a gun.
And we'll see you next week.
And we'll see you next week.